We're live. Eric Fitzpatrick.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Eric Fitzpatrick with the Office of Legislative Counsel, here to talk with the committee about the updated version of a potential committee amendment to Proposal 4 to the Vermont Constitution, which you may recall as establishing a state version of the Equal Protection Clause that's in the United States Constitution. And the language should look familiar to you. It's actually, although there's no highlights, so it's a plain edited copy, although there is one capitalization question that I sent to John Bloomer. Other than that, it's been proofed and edited. The language is, as I mentioned, doesn't have highlights, but it's actually the same as the version that you looked at last time, which is to say that it's with one exception, identical to the version that was introduced in 2019, and that exception is that for the protected categories, it adds religion. So religion is added both in line 11 of page 1, as well as in the substantive provision, which would be over on page 2, and that's line 16. So that was a protected class that was added in this version. I think the committee may recall that there is a statement of purpose that would not be included on the ballot question necessarily, but here to provide a reiteration of what the legislative purpose is in enacting the new constitutional provision. The substantive language itself is on page 2, that starts on line 12, and you may recall that rather than being embedded as part of an existing constitutional provision, in particular the Common Benefits Clause, which the approach that was taken in the version of this amendment was introduced this year. This instead creates a separate constitutional provision. Article 23 would actually follow Article 22, which was approved, passed by the legislature, approved by the voters relating to reproductive rights. So that's Article 22. This would be the article that followed that one, Article 23, Equality of Rights. So you see the substantive language under that title, line 13, that people are guaranteed equal protection under the law. Again, this concept is of equal protection parallel to the United States Constitution. And then specifically provides that the state shall not deny equal treatment and respect under the law on account of a person's, and then it lists the protected classes, the protected category. And those are race, ethnicity, sex, religion, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or national origin. That last sentence there in that substantive provision is essentially an interpretive guidance for the court in the case that litigation is brought for any state action, which certainly there would be at some point in time. Nothing in this article shall be interpreted or applied to prevent the adoption or implementation of measures intended to provide equality of treatment and opportunity for members of groups that have historically been subject to discrimination. So in other words, if you thought of, as an example, say the Bureau of Racial Justice Statistics, just to pick an entity that the legislature has committed, will have some language, some boilerplate language that the legislature has often included that says that when looking for members of this legislatively created body, that consideration would be given to people's membership in classes that have historically been subject to discrimination, including the racial makeup of these boards. So without that sentence, if you think about it, one might argue that that's a preferential treatment based on race, and might that be viewed as a violation of this newly enacted clause. So the point of adding that sentence is to make clear as an interpretive guide for the courts that an attempt to redress members of groups that have historically been subject to discrimination, as in including them expressly in some legislatively created board,
would that
not be a violation.
For both the court and the legislature?
It would be
the example you just gave is legislative.
Right.
So I would think the legislature might also use that as a guide.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The legislature would, for the court to decide ultimately whether it's a constitutional violation, but I think it's a very good point that the legislature would want to keep that in mind as it created, new laws in the future.
Okay. Senator Bell.
Yeah, my question is actually on content, and I seem to recall in the last discussion, we had agreed, or I thought we did as a committee, to add the language of in intent or effect, so that the people are guaranteed equal protection under the law. The state.
There was further discussion,
Okay.
and we decided not to.
I thought there was another spot where we decided not to, but maybe I missed it. But I thought we had
Maybe
decided.
I'm mistaken, but I thought we decided not to because there was something.
So
I can't remember why, but
my recollection was that portion we had decided to do, but the self-executing portion we had, so there were 2 points of discussion, and I thought one we said okay and one we decided not to. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know if anyone.
My understanding of the conversation subsequent to the committee meeting was for this draft not to include it.
Okay.
So, and if I could articulate a rationale for that if you like, or.
yes, would you please?
Yes, the rationale for that, as I understood it, was twofold, but that, while an effect, what might sometimes called constitutionally disparate impact of a state action. So in other words, it's not a state action that intentionally discriminates based on one of the protected categories, but may have the effect or the impact of making distinctions or discriminating on the basis of one of the protected categories would expand the reach of the constitutional provision significantly. And that while it's true that under the federal constitution that the intentional discrimination is often the only discrimination that's protected, that's not necessarily the way that the Vermont Supreme Court or Vermont courts would review this proposed language. So I think the decision was leave it up to the courts, given the impact that it would have, because there may be some instances in which because of the much broader impact, the broader range of activity that would be potentially unconstitutional as a result of including disparate or effects, that it would be better not to make a broad statement that in every instance, any potential effect of discrimination would be unconstitutional. Leave it to the courts, because in some cases, particularly Vermont, which is not going to be bound by what federal constitutional interpretation is, they may say, in some cases, it's appropriate to only have intentional discrimination be required. In other cases, it may be, leave it to the particular facts, in other words, of the type of case that was brought.
Senator Sheen, then Senator.
Thanks. I'm trying to think of an example that I think might clarify this, and let me know if I'm wrong, but like, for example, national origin, like, for example, we have rules that say, if you want to run for office, if you want to run for the legislature, you have to be a Vermont resident. And that would have the effect, I suppose it could be argued that it may have the effect, if that language were included, to say that if somebody's not a Vermont resident, they can still run for office or serve in a position, even though, is that making any sense?
I think it's a good example. I think if I'm understanding it correctly, you're saying that, for example, a requirement of that nature, although not intended to restrict.
Has the effect, the incidental effect.
Yes, exactly.
I would even argue that it was intended
Maybe so.
to do that. Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
If I might. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding the language on page 2.
Yep.
So the state shall not deny equal treatment and respect under the law on account of blah, blah, blah. That's the foundational thing.
Right.
But then there's a qualifier. Nothing in this article shall be interpreted or applied to prevent the adoption or implementation of measures intended to provide equality of treatment. So in other words, there's this constitutional standard of equality, equal treatment and respect. Then the legislature determines that there's not equal treatment in an area. We act to redress that.
Yeah.
This is protecting our ability to redress that to the point of equality.
It's an excellent paraphrase of it.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
Yes.
yeah, no, quickly, like, I understand and I'm not gonna not vote for this, but I have to say I disagree with the decision not to include an intent or effect. I think if we're making policy that is accidentally discriminatory, that people should be protected from that.
But the courts already protect that, right? So someone has the right always to challenge in court if they feel, whether we intended it or not, the effect is discriminatory, right?
Yes, this isn't excluding the possibility of that potential, not only under the constitutional clause, but under various state laws that protect
Yeah.
against discrimination. It's rather saying that as a general rule, which again, you may perfectly legit to look at it from a different policy angle, but it's as the effect of including or disincluding the language doesn't mean you wouldn't necessarily be able to bring that claim, but it would be less protected, obviously.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, that is, I hear that that's where we've landed. I disagree.
Okay. So are there any comments from anybody in the audience about draft 3.1? Yes, please. If you would identify yourself for the record and,
Shall I?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I don't know if anybody else wants to testify, but we've got about 15 minutes for that, and I want to.
Did you want me to?
Yeah, if you could be brief, though, please. Any testimony should be brief.
Oh.
Please.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to make a brief statement. My name is Renee McGinnis. I'm the policy analyst for Vermont Family Alliance. I also had sent this morning by email. Vermont Family Alliance requests that the Committee on Judiciary consider Professor Teachout's recommended language, which has not been discussed by this committee to date. And to quote his recommended language in his testimony, Teachout recommended every person is entitled to be treated with equal respect and dignity under the law. Therefore, government acting either alone or in conjunction with private actors shall not deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law or deny any person the equal protection of the laws. The legislature shall have the power to enforce the provisions of this article with appropriate legislation. So that is Professor Teachout's recommended language. We agree with this language that it covers every person and that just not specific groups are listed. No one can deny humans that historically and presently human beings treat one another horribly on occasion, and that the Constitution has not been followed, providing equal protections for everyone. I think we all need to admit to that, and that it is appalling and grievous. When we consider crimes against humanity, it should be the perpetrators, not the taxpayers, that make reparations for unethical and immoral behavior and that violate our Constitution. Committee discussion and the accepted witness testimony indicates legislators do not intend to protect each person equally under Proposition 4, but to roll out legislation under Prop 4 for the purposes of affirmative action and equity programs and to strengthen courts in favor of groups listed in Prop 4 over others. Equal protection under the law and equity programs are two different ideas and intents. Our Constitution is intended to provide equal rights, not equal things. So Vermont Family Alliance asks that you postpone the vote on the current language presented and have some discussion about Professor Teachout's recommended language, which would protect each person, including those on the listed groups. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Falco and then.
Good afternoon, or morning. For the record, Falco Schilling, Advocacy Director for the ACLU of Vermont. So coming back to the testimony that we provided, I think there were three main things that we were hoping that might be incorporated into this draft. The intent and effect, I feel like the committee has already discussed that. I think we are more in line with Senator Bohofsky's thinking that we would want to be more expansive in order to fill the gaps that exist in current federal equal protection legislation, but I'm not going to spend as much time on that just because I feel like the conversation's been happening. One thing we did want to highlight in our proposed changes was language that would go into the intent section regarding the addition of religion, which happened since the original draft. As we've discussed, religion is covered under Article 3 of the Constitution currently, and so to avoid confusion or creating a whole new jurisprudence around equal protection for religion, we proposed, and this is in what we sent to the committee, language saying that interpreting this amendment, the court shall analyze claims of religious discrimination under the same analysis and standards applied to claims arising out of Article 3. So what that is saying is that there's existing jurisprudence on how we deal with religious discrimination within the Vermont State Constitution under Article 3, and this would clarify to the courts when they are trying to apply claims arising from this new amendment that they would continue to use that jurisprudence and not have to create a new jurisprudence with that would be different from what currently exists. And that's part of the reason that we did not advocate originally for the need to add religion to this list, because we do think it is currently protected under Article 3 of the Constitution. So that is language that I hope the committee would consider. The other language we proposed that we think would be helpful with making it clear that this article is self-executing. It seems that the intent of the committee is that this would be self-executing, meaning that folks could bring suit for violations of this article. There's some discussion of things like Article 1. Senator Norris, you brought this up, and you said, why isn't this providing the protection? It's because the Vermont Supreme Court has found that Article 1 is not self-executing. People can't bring suit under Article 1. So that was another clarification that could go into the intent section as opposed to the language itself. So that was my attempt to try and keep it brief on kind of our three main points.
Thank you. Senator.
Just to follow up, so on the piece about religion and directing a future court to Article 3, my sense is that a number of these articulated things are already protected in our Constitution. Is that correct? So discrimination based on race, sex, are we, if we were not to amend the Constitution, is there already jurisprudence about those areas?
Not expressly, so there aren't express constitutional provisions that protect those classes. Sometimes cases arise, I think that's part of the what's led up to this point. Sometimes cases arise under the common benefits clause that would arise for alleged discrimination based on membership in one of the listed classes. I don't think there's any express provision relating to the other.
Yeah, I guess I'm just a little leery of having language that distinguishes religion from the other pieces.
I heard that.
I have a little trouble seeing the need for that. But
I think in response to that, what I would say is that religion is already explicitly protected under the Vermont State Constitution in a way these other categories are not explicitly protected under the Common Benefits Clause. And so that is why, one, we didn't propose including it in their, adding that to the original draft, but also think that this could clarify for the courts how they address it and to continue to build off of the existing jurisprudence.
Thank you. Senator Bowski.
Yeah, in
Is it for Falco?
well, it's kind of in response to Senator Baruth's concern around sort of explicitly carving out religion. I'd argue it already is in our Constitution. It is already treated differently than all these other things. So and everything you're proposing goes in the intent section.
This would not be in the language of the bill itself. It could be done in the intent section or in a execution section, something along those lines. I'd leave that to legislative council how they'd want to draft it. I think it'd be clarifying intent of the legislature.
Because I do think there is something sort of inherently different about placing it in the intent section for a future person to go back and look at what our intent was. I know Senator Sears, you pointed to a previous constitutional amendment where the intent wasn't where the court landed. So I do think that that's.
Okay. Senator.
So I don't understand how Article 3 provides the same type of protection as expressed in this proposed Article 23, because my understanding is that Article 3 refers to compelled exercise, whereas this is equal protection. So what I'm envisioning is the hypothetical scenario where someone who is, let's say they're Buddhist, and they apply for some sort of benefit, and the office says, we don't like Buddhist people, we're not giving you this benefit of whatever it is. That would be prohibited, in my mind, if this were passed, whereas Article 3, at least with the way I'm understanding it, prohibits the compelled exercise of a certain religion. So can you clarify for me, or like, where am I wrong, or what am I missing?
Yeah, I think I mean, one, I will have to say that, unfortunately, some of our attorneys couldn't be here today for this meeting, so they might have a little bit more to offer in supplement to that. But I think the concern is when you have explicit protections for, free exercise of religion, that in other parts of the Constitution, that might, adding this extra layer of protection in another section could create even more or create unintended consequences in terms of how the free exercise of religion is viewed under our state constitution, and that's something that's not quite in play now, and we've seen that play out in a number of different ways. So I think it's more trying to stave off unintended consequences that might come from the proposed language.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it. The Senator Norris, I'm sorry.
Quick question, Falco or Eric or whatever else. So are all these race, ethnicity, sex, religion, disability, are these all protected classes?
In the proposal or currently?
Do they fall under protected status right now?
Under
anything.
Public Accommodations Act, or, I mean, I think many of them do fall under protections of our current Public Accommodations Act.
Yes.
And I believe that's where much of this language was drawn from.
Are we missing anything in these protective status categories?
No, I think it covers them all. I checked on that earlier.
Because rather than to split over all these words and whatever else, I mean, the state shall deny equal treatment and respect on the law on account of a person's protective status. That'd be my recommendation.
Yeah, for example, sorry, to interrupt.
I was gonna hear from, Carrie Brown, from the, Commission on Women, and then discuss the final minutes.
Thank you. Carrie Brown, Vermont Commission on Women. I don't have a lot of substance to add, just wanted to kind of chime in a little bit to say that our staff has been kind of looking at this proposed language around intent or effect, and feels that it would be only useful to include that if we also included, as you have done in your current draft, the language about nothing shall prohibit additional action to provide equality for people who historically.
So you're talking about the
discriminated
second
against. Yeah,
sentence?
yeah. So if those two were together, okay, but then also that there would be certainly some period of time where we would need to see what the courts did and, have the courts kind of work that out. That there are definitely examples at the federal level where the court has not interpreted it in the way that would imply, so that the effect is not necessarily interpreted as discriminatory. And so including it would signal that that was the intent. And at the same time, there's still a lot to kind of work out.
I'm a little confused when you say it. what do you mean?
Oh, I'm sorry.
It.
The, including
Intent
the
and
intent or in effect.
I see.
Language that you have decided not to include.
Right.
At this point, it's not in the latest draft, but that there's definitely arguments both ways to go with that. And so we don't have we're okay with the way it is now, but we can also see definite benefits to including it,
But
with some kind of cautions.
I do think that the section, the line 17 through 20 on page 2 are important.
Yes, that's absolutely
Line
correct.
chart.
Yes, yes.
So, Eric, other questions for Carrie?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
for the opportunity.
Eric?
Well, I was just gonna respond to Senator Norris's question, that those categories are very similar to the ones that you have in various parts of the public accommodations country.
You mean the AKA protective status?
Yes.
Is there any interest in doing anything? Moving forward, proposal 4, letting it,
I am comfortable with the language here on page 2. And so I would move it favorably.
Senator Baruch has moved favorably. We report proposal 4 as amended in draft 3.1. Draft 3.1 is what I have in front of me. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, if you don't mind, sir. I don't feel that this is needed. I feel that the Constitution at the state and federal level already protect the individuals. I think personally, this is a knee-jerk reaction from certain members because of the Roe versus Wade decision that the federal government may come up with another decision through the Supreme Court to come down. And this is an over effort by Vermonters to, you're just trying to deflect any decisions that may come down from the federal level when it hasn't come down from the federal level. So I think that this is not needed. I wrestle with how to vote on this because I do support equal protection for all protected statuses, but to individually list all of these individual statuses without just grouping everybody together as the people, I think we're being a finite decision-making process here.
I'm supportive of what we have in front of us. Just my reasoning, quite frankly, is my experience in this position as chair of this committee during civil unions. It was a very contested, very difficult time where a lot of us evolved positions. And now I've seen the world change its positions on gay marriage. And yet we have two members of the current United States Supreme Court who have talked about undoing that. And if for no other reason, I would vote for this amendment to make sure that we're protecting it under the Constitution. The experience was one that at the time, both my wife and I dreaded because we were under constant attack. And not just me, my wife, who, that's why I almost pulled the phone out of the wall, because she would be at home getting calls from Texas and wherever, opposing the bill, at 2 o'clock in the morning, because it was different time zones. And, it was a struggle for both of us. And we were getting attacked up here. And going through all that to see and seeing how the world has changed, I certainly don't want to go through that again because the U.S. Supreme Court has a different rule. So, while I don't have to vote until the end, I'm going to vote. Senator.
Yeah, no, Senators, I appreciate that sort of frame in history. And, I think we can look throughout our data and statistics and throughout our systems and see that people aren't equally protected under the law. And my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, the first time this was introduced was in 2019?
That's right.
Which was before the Roe v. Wade court decision. And so I don't see it as a knee jerk. I see it as something that this body has been working on for quite some time, recognizing that under current statute and current constitutional protections, people are not equally protected. So I am, while there's places where I might like to change the language some or add some language, I can't imagine not voting yes to move forward stronger protections.
Senator Bruce.
I just wanted to add, I share Senator Norris's, at least initially, I was a little puzzled. Why should we list out the categories when we have a common benefits clause? We have the perception of equality in our Constitution. But, again, the last 5-10 years have taught me that it is possible for a court to not recognize certain people as persons, number one, but not to recognize certain things that are essential to their ways of being as protected under the law. So gender identity and gender expression, those have been areas where there are ongoing efforts to erase those categories and to pull them out of that common protection status in other states. And so on balance, I think it's best at this moment to list them out. And I support adding religion in too, because although I'm not necessarily a religious person myself, I truly believe that should be protected in America. So I like where we've landed, and the second sentence understood as making sure that people are brought to the line of equality, but not preferring them over anybody else. That seems to be very much in keeping with sentence 1. So I'm content and will vote yes.
Want to call it roll? Yes. Since some of us have already voted.
Yeah, but, well, let me just close and say, okay.
Yeah.
I struggle with this, okay? and I won't tell you as to why my personal preference is whatever else. All of these particular areas, I mean, it goes without saying, I know folks, I have friends, whatever else. I don't think it's needed. I'm glad that it was separated as a separate article. And because, I don't know if it's my specific request or whatever, religion still remains in here. But I really don't think it's needed, folks, and I'll give you my reason as to why I said that. But I mean, I'll support it, but I don't think it's needed. I'll put that on the record officially here. So this is what I'm telling you here. So, because I can't see not voting against protection for all individuals, because we're not messing with the intent and whatever else. You kept a religion in there. This may come as a strange word for you folks, but this is called compromise, okay?
United we stand.
Yeah. So I think, go ahead and go formally.
Senator Brewer.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
Yes.
Senator Walsky.
Yes.
Senator Sheep.
Yes.
Senator Six.
Yes.
Vice President.
Is there anybody chomping at the bit to report?
Not good.
I think Nader did an amazing job on the last proposition, so unless someone prefers it, I would nominate Nader.
Sure. Happy to. Wait, which proposal did
I
I?
was like,
I'm sorry, the,
59?
no, Prop 3, wasn't
that
it?
was Senator Harrison.
Yeah, that was Harris. We
Or
do
no.
look similar.
No, what was the one you just did though?
It was 259.
259, that's what I did.
Same county, so.
Same county.
That was the, bill one.
Yeah, the Sumer.
I'd be happy to back you up, Sen.
Oh, thank you.